How many decisions do you think you make during the average day? Psychologists believe that the number is actually in the thousands. Some of these decisions have resounding effects over the course of our lives, while others are relatively trivial. Some of these choices turn out to be really good, while others end up being not so great. So as you look back at your life and think about some of the poor choices you have made, you might find yourself wondering exactly why you made those decisions that seem so poor now in retrospect. In this video, you will gain a deeper understanding of the process behind these sometimes irrational choices, and knowing how these processes work can perhaps help you make better decisions in the future. How do you know that the price you paid for a gallon of milk at the grocery store was fair? The comparison is one of the major tools we use when making decisions. You know what the typical price of a gallon of milk is, so you compare the deals to find in order to select the best possible price. We assign value based on how items compare to other things. But what happens when you make poor comparisons? Or when the items you are comparing your options to are not representative or equal? Consider this, for example. How far out of your way would you go to save $30? If I told you that you could save $30 on a $75 item by driving 20 minutes out of your way, you would probably do it. But if I told you that you could save $30 off of a $10,000 item, would you still be willing to go out of your way to save the money? In most cases, people are less willing to travel further to save money on the more expensive item. Why? $30 is still worth the same amount in either case. In such instances, you've just fallen victim to a faulty comparison. Since you are comparing the amount you save to the amount you pay, $30 seems like a much greater savings when it is compared against a $75 item than it does when contrasted with a $10,000 item. When making decisions, we often make rapid comparisons without really thinking about our options. If we had to think through every possible scenario for every possible decision, we probably wouldn't get much done in a day. In order to make decisions quickly and economically, our brains rely on a number of mental shortcuts. One example of this mental shortcut is known as the anchoring bias. In many different situations, people use an initial starting point as an anchor that is then adjusted to yield a final estimate or value. For example, if you are buying a house and you know that homes in your target neighborhood typically sell for an average price of $358,000, you will probably use that figure as a basis to negotiate the purchase price of the home you choose. So what can you do to minimize the potential negative impact of these heuristics on your decisions? In the case of the anchoring bias, coming up with a range of possible estimates can help. So if you're buying a new car, come up with a range of reasonable prices rather than focusing on the overall average price of a particular vehicle. Surprisingly, people tend to have a natural-born optimism that can hamper good decision-making. In one fascinating study, researcher Tali Sharrett asked participants what they thought the chances were of a number of unpleasant events happening, things such as being robbed or getting a terminal illness. After the subjects had given their predictions, the researchers then told them what the actual probabilities were. When people are told that the risk of something bad happening is lower than they expected, they tend to then adjust their predictions to match the new information they learned. When they discover that the risk of something bad happening is actually much higher than they estimated, they tend to simply ignore the new information. For example, if a person predicts that the odds of dying from smoking cigarettes is only 3%, but is then told that the real risk of dying is actually closer to 30%, people will likely ignore the new information and stick with their initial estimate. Thanks for watching, and make sure to subscribe.